So first of all, welcome, especially if this is your first time at Sangha Night. I'm not sure if there's anyone here who it is, but what happens is there's going to be a bit of a double act tonight, me and Bodhi Naga. And then the normal kind of format is then we go to groups, have a tea break, and then we do meditation after that. So I'm Satyajyoti, it's Bodhi Naga. And what we're talking about today is about pleasure. So we're talking about that very crucial and key part of the spiritual path, aspect of the spiritual path, which is pleasure. So the title of the talk is "It's Not About Being Miserable." And what the talk comes out of is the series that we're doing at the moment. So since last October, we've been doing a series of talks about Buddhism through time and space. And we've arrived here now in this in Sheffield in 2014, and we're looking at how do we practice, people from our Western culture, with all the the great luxury we live in, but all the difficulties we face as well. How do we actually practice the Dharma? So I think to some people, and I hope not to us, but to some people, Buddhism has been seen in the West as being a very miserable thing, actually, that just concentrates on suffering. And I think that kind of comes from a few false ideas. One is maybe they've seen monks living very, very kind of ascetic lives, not eating after noon, just leading this kind of particular difficult life. And it looks like that wouldn't be much fun at all. And then the second way might be that some of the people, I think, who translated early Buddhism, some of the Westerners, they kind of particularly concentrated on the fact that the Buddha talked about suffering, which he most certainly did, but they seem to have forgotten the fact that what he taught was the path away from suffering, that was the key thing that he taught. It wasn't about lingering in our suffering at all, it was about how can we move away from it. So there's a wonderful phrase from a very important sage, I hope he's here actually, from Amoghavansha. He says, Buddhism is about giving up being miserable. Okay? So sometimes we can be really worried that Buddhism's going to mean we have to give up all sorts of things that we think give us pleasure. So, we might think we get pleasure from, getting really drunk, eating steak, all that kind of stuff, and we're going to have to give it up and we'll never have any fun anymore. But what it is about, it's about moving much towards having much more pleasure in our lives, a much more kind of pleasure that lasts, a pleasure that is, so we're going to talk about that a bit more. So I just wanted to start it off in a framework from the Buddha. So hopefully you'll remember, if you've just come from the intermediate course, that we looked at the Four Noble Truths, which is one of the key teachings of the Buddha. And what he's talking about here is the path from leading from suffering, or dukkha, and satisfactoriness, and the way that we can use the Eightfold Path to move towards not experiencing suffering in the same way. Okay. We haven't practiced our transitions, so they might be a bit
Okay, so hands up who likes pleasure. That's good. So in our particular age, our particular culture, I don't think it's specific to our culture because it would have been the same at the time of the Buddha and the other cultures that Buddhism's been through, but human beings like pleasure. It's part of being human is that we like pleasure. Pleasure is attractive. We seek pleasure, we're drawn to pleasure. And our culture, our particular age that we're practicing now, we've become specialists in pleasure. We specialise in seeking for pleasure and accessing pleasure. So we live in an age of unprecedented wealth, unprecedented standards of living, of comfort, of opportunity, and we can fulfil all of our desires pretty much compared to civilizations of the past. We can fulfil all of our desires pretty much at the touch of a button or the click of a mouse even. We can just order something on Amazon or wherever we order it from. We can visit whatever place we want to on the internet. We can order things very, very quickly. We can access pleasures very, very quickly. And you could say we've got temples dedicated to pleasure. We've got kind of pleasure houses, and they're places like Meadowhall and IKEA and the big mega stores, Asda and Tesco, where we can buy whatever we want to buy from the shelves. They've got all kinds of different brands, all kinds of different choices to give us pleasure. We've got the airports full of holidaymakers going to or coming back from their pleasure-filled holidays. And our society, we're a society of consumers. We consume pleasure and we consume possessions and wealth. And the question I would ask is, are we happy? Does this make us happy? And unfortunately, the answer is, also as well as being a time of unprecedented wealth, it's also a time of unusually high levels of anxiety, of stress, of depression. Basically people experience suffering, people aren't happy. There's this paradox where we've got all this access to pleasure and we're not happy in our society. So why is that? What's the problem? One of you could say the great tragedy of our time or of human beings is that our relationship to pleasure stops us from enjoying it. The way we relate to pleasure stops us from enjoying it. And then our relationship to suffering causes more suffering. So in a way we've got this kind of self-perpetuating situation where we're trying to escape suffering and causing more and more suffering, trying to chase after pleasure and stopping ourselves from enjoying pleasure. So I'm going to unpack that a bit more about how that works and how that happens. But I'm going to do that in using this framework of the three lakshanas. So hopefully we've all encountered this teaching, this list on the beginner's course of the three lakshanas, the three marks, and Vidanya talked about these last week as well, if you were here last week. But in particular, just very briefly, they are that everything changes, anicca, everything changes. Everything is in a constant flux, a constant process of change. Very briefly, that's the first lakshana. The second lakshana, anatman, is an implication of that really. There's everything is changing, nothing stays the same. There's nothing which you can find in any particular thing which you can say is the essence of that thing. There's nothing fixed and essential about anything. Everything is constantly changing, everything's constantly interacting and influencing everything else. So things, as we call them things, actually don't have an essence which is fixed. And there's positive, we talk about positive aspects of these which are kind of more attractive and more appealing. On the beginner's course we look at, from impermanence we can change. There's nothing about us that's fixed, we can become who we want to become. And maybe the appealing aspect of anatman is that we're interconnected, we live in a kind of mysterious web of interconnected processes with the whole of the world around us. And that can be very fulfilling and satisfying and very mysterious. So I'll talk a little bit more about those later, but the one I'm going to focus on is unsatisfactoriness, because really that's the problem. That is the problem of human nature. It's the problem of human beings is that we've got all this pleasure, but we don't know how to enjoy it. We end up unsatisfied. So this problem of unsatisfactoriness. And the Buddha in his famous teaching of the Four Noble Truths said, the problem of the human existence is dukkha, and the cause of that problem is craving. And as Satchidarita said, is that the Buddha also taught a cure from suffering and a path to escape from suffering. But what I'm going to focus on in my first section is basically the problem, what causes our unhappiness. So as I was saying, the kind of tragedy of our time is that we're trying to escape from suffering, and the method, the way we try and escape from suffering, craving, actually causes more suffering. So we're in this kind of perpetuating cycle where we end up causing ourselves more and more suffering, chasing more and more pleasure, causing ourselves more and more suffering. So what does the Buddha mean when he says that we suffer, or that there is suffering in life, or unsatisfactoriness? So, I want to explore first of all what the Buddha meant, and then secondly how we fuel that by our response to dukkha, by craving. So, I'm not going to say what I've written down. Stuff happens. But, I was going to say something else, but stuff happens. That's the first part of it. Basically, stuff happens that we don't want to happen. So that's the main ways that we suffer, is that stuff happens we don't want to happen. And and our things break, our possessions break, people let us down, things are unreliable, our cars break down, our houses need fixing. We suffer stress and anxiety about all kinds of things, about status, about possessions, about relationships, about jobs. In our society, people suffer from depression and low self-esteem. That's another aspect of how we suffer. Another way that we suffer as well is that we're just not really present with what's happening. We live quite a distracted existence. Our mind's distracted, so it stops us from being fully here with what's happening, fully present, and that causes suffering. Also, for a lot of people, their life is just on the surface of things. There's no kind of real depth or meaning to their life. So that can be another way that suffering can be caused. If we're living a life without real value and real meaning, that creates suffering, that creates, unsatisfactoriness. And then finally, for a lot of people, their life is lonely and isolated. They feel cut off from people around them. This is also another of the features of our society, our culture. Despite all this great technology, people feel isolated and cut off and lonely. So there is suffering, there is dukkha. And unfortunately the popular response, which is inbuilt to being a human, this is what the Buddha described as being the cause of a lot of our suffering actually, is our response to suffering, which is craving. So I'm going to unpack how we cause our own suffering by our relationship to pleasure, how we stop ourselves from enjoying pleasure, by unpacking it with these three lakshanas. So it's a bit doomy and gloomy to start with, but just to advertise what's going to come up later in the talk. Satyajyoti is going to talk then about how we can access pleasure in a healthy way, in a way in which we can enjoy. So that's an advert for what's to come. So if you can bear with the suffering a bit to start with. So craving is typified. It's a kind of selfish focus on getting our own needs fulfilled, on what we want and what we like. And it's described by the Buddha. The word that was used for the Buddha is a word tanha, which can be translated as thirst. It's as though there's this thirst, almost like an unquenchable thirst. And what we reach for doesn't quench our thirst, it makes us more thirsty. So there was a famous Buddhist teacher, Shantideva. He described it as though we drink salt water to quench our thirst, and we end up becoming more thirsty. So how do we do that? Well, we try and control things. We try and control the world and things out there to avoid unpleasant experiences and to just get as much pleasure as we can. That's one way in which craving expresses itself. So we only want pleasant experiences, and we want to try and push away and not have anything unpleasant. We try and avoid that. So we try and set up our lives to kind of fit how we want them to be, to match our particular own likes and dislikes. Another aspect of craving is what Sangha, our founder, calls a neurotic craving. It's that we look for qualities in objects, in people, things, experiences that aren't there. We think that a particular experience or possession will give us a quality that it can't give us. So, and I'll add, this is an inbuilt human quality, but it's really in our society fueled by consumerism, by adverts. So, in a sense, we're not completely to blame, because adverts try and sell us qualities that just don't exist. In a way, the adverts are lying to us, if we're going to talk frankly. And I used to work in advertising, so I feel like I can say that. A long time ago. So for example, you might see an advert for a pair of jeans which tells you that if you buy this particular pair of jeans, they'll give you the quality of desirability, you'll become desirable, and you'll get the perfect partner, you'll get the ideal partner if you own this pair of jeans. Or it might be if you get this particular car, you're going to become very glamorous, you're going to have lots of status, whatever it is. If you have this particular chocolate bar, you're going to feel connected with people, you're going to feel loved, you're going to feel happy. If you eat this particular cereal, you're going to lose weight and look very glamorous. And of course, all of the adverts are lying in a sense. That these things aren't going to happen. These qualities don't exist in these items. And that's because of this quality of an Atman. So, basically there aren't essential qualities to a pair of jeans. A pair of jeans can't contain the quality of desirability or kind of glamorousness, whatever that quality might be. There isn't an essence to a pair of jeans which has those kind of qualities. And also we're looking to kind of fill a lack. We've got a sense of lack, that we lack qualities, and somehow we can fill this lack with these, these goods, these possessions, or these pleasurable experiences. And it doesn't work like that. That doesn't work. And more than that, actually, the adverts make us feel like they fuel that sense of lack, the kind of sense of depression and low self-esteem that we experience through dukkha. The adverts tell us, well, you've not got the right pair of jeans, you've not got the right car, you've not got the right makeup, or whatever it is, you haven't got the right pair of shoes. So the adverts kind of fuel this message that we lack, we're not good enough. And also, conveniently, if we buy the product, then we won't we'll have the thing that we need. And so the craving is all about kind of grasping after these experiences, these pleasures, these possessions that will fill this perceived sense of lack, this low self-esteem. So what a feature of this is we're experiencing this dukkha. We've got this whole list of dukkha that I explained, and we're just a lot of the time trying to also distract ourselves with pleasures. So we're kind of reaching for something just to take away the sense that we are unhappy, just to kind of distract ourselves from being unhappy. And Satyajuta is going to give an example of this later, which is something a classic example that I do as well, just living in a state of distraction. So craving, in a sense, one of the ways it causes dukkha is because we're constantly trying to reach for pleasures to distract ourselves from being unhappy. We end up living just on the surface of things. We end up not actually enjoying the pleasure. So a classic example for me is a chocolate bar or food. I really kind of crave after food. I want a nice dessert. Or if I go to a restaurant, all I think about, all the way through the meal is the dessert. I'm to order the starters, order the main course, and my mind just thinking, I'm going to have the chocolate, usually the chocolate brownie, sometimes a sticky toffee. I'm going to have the dessert. And so my mind's kind of obsessive, so I'm not really tasting the lovely main course that's there, I'm just thinking about the dessert. And then when the dessert comes, I'm not really enjoying the dessert either, because I'm thinking, did I pick the right dessert? Have I got the right dessert? Or just kind of, when am I going to have when's my next chocolate dessert going to be? So we have this kind of strange relationship with pleasure where we're constantly thinking about the next pleasure and not really enjoying the pleasure that we're having now. We live in this kind of state of distraction, just trying to distract ourselves. And it's just causing more and more dukkha, and then we need to distract ourselves more and more from this dukkha. And of course, I don't think I've touched on this already, but I mentioned it briefly, things break, we get possessions, we get things the way we want them to be, and then they break, we get the latest phone, and then it changes, it's not the latest phone anymore. Apple brings out a new phone in a year's time, so we haven't got the latest phone anymore. We get a brand new car with a shiny new registration plate, and then 6 months later, there's no longer a new car. So impermanence means that our possessions don't fulfil what we're expecting of them, and then they break, they're unreliable. Another aspect of impermanence is just the fleeting nature of pleasurable experiences. We want our pleasure to kind of really fill us and make us feel kind of someone special, and to kind of really enjoy them, but then they're gone, they're just gone in a moment. That chocolate pudding, that mouthful, and as soon as I've tasted it, the experience is gone. The fleeting nature of pleasure makes us, means that this relationship to them doesn't work. We can't hold on to them, we can't kind of keep them, we can't grasp onto them, they kind of slip through our fingers. And maybe finally, the kind of final way in which this way of living, this kind of way of living that society encourages and the adverts encourage, causes suffering, is just that we're not living with the truth of interconnectedness. If we're just focusing on what we can get from me and mine, trying to grab and hoard possessions, trying to get as much pleasure as I can, well, it means we're not focusing on other people. When we're in that state of mind, which is craving and all about me, my own wants, my own needs, I'm not thinking about other people in that state of mind, and that causes suffering. I'm closed off, I'm isolated. So, and it's not living in the line with the truth of interconnectedness. So we're creating a kind of cramped, well, Daniel described it last week as a kind of almost like a cramped prison-like existence with our kind of selfish orientation, our selfish approach to life. So, basically, Well, I think it's really clear if you look at it the way we live our lives, a lot of the experiences of dukkha that are listed at the start come down to this way of living, this approach of trying to grasp after pleasure, hold on to it, to try and get things how we want them to be, trying to focus on my needs, my likes. And unfortunately, it doesn't work. This is the teaching of the Buddha, which I think applies in our age more than ever. This approach to life causes suffering. Dukkha is the cause of, or craving is the cause of dukkha. But the good news is, which if you keep coming to the Buddhist Centre you hear about more and more, is that there is a cure. There's a cure to that way of life, and it's the Buddhist path, the Eightfold Path, is the cure to this way of life. Probably not time for a story, is it?
Go on.
Okay, just to illustrate, it's a story everyone's heard already, and just to kind of recap on it, is the classic illustration of this approach to pleasure and happiness and it not working is the story we tell about the king, Ajatasattu, and the Buddha. So we've hopefully all heard this story on the beginner's course, but we've got this. The example of the king who goes to meet the Buddha to find out how to kind of find peace of mind, how to be happy. And he goes and he takes along all of his entourage, he takes along his ministers, he takes along his entertainment, his jugglers and his dancing girls. He takes them all along, and his ministers, his advisors. But bit by bit along the path to go and meet the Buddha through the jungle, he has to leave these behind. He has to leave, because the path is so narrow, he has to leave behind his ministers. He has to leave behind his jugglers, his entertainment, and eventually he's just going in single file with his attendant. And he becomes very afraid, actually, when all that protection is taken away, all his distractions in a way are taken away from him. He becomes frightened and anxious. He becomes isolated. He feels isolated. He fears that he's being led into a trap. So the king is a real kind of archetype of this way of living. He relies on being distracted. His sense of who he is depends on all the kind of people around him. And people live in fear of him, and he lives in fear of other people. He's not a happy man, he's a troubled man. But eventually he arrives at the clearing where the Buddha's seated. The Buddha's there with, I think, 1,200 monks. And the reason that the king is so frightened is because he can't hear anything, and he thinks, this must be a trap. I can't hear any sound, any noise at all coming from this clearing. This must be a trap. And his attendant says, no, the Buddha's just through there. He's just through there. And they're meditating, that's why it's so still and calm. And when Ajatasattu goes into the clearing, he's very, very moved, actually, by just the tranquility, the serenity of the Buddha and his disciples just seated there, not making a sound, not moving, just completely still. And the version of the story that we tell, the Buddha and the Ajatasattu have a dialogue where Ajatasattu kind of, he's a bit miffed. He kind of he's not happy that the Buddha is the focus of everybody's attention. People think that the Buddha is very special. And he says to the Buddha, well, I'm a happier person than you. I must be a happier person. I've got all this wealth, I've got all this status, people fear me. I'm a happier person than you. And the Buddha answers this kind of challenge in a way quite simply by just asking Ajatasattu for how long he could sit still with like the Buddha and his monks without all of the distractions that he usually has, all the entertainment, all the pleasures, all the food, all the music. And Ajatasattu kind of goes along with it for a while, but eventually has to admit, well, he couldn't sit for very long at all, actually, without all of these distractions. And the Buddha's able to say, well, I can sit as long as I want to. I can sit here, I can sit anywhere in the world, and I'll be completely happy. I'll be completely, blissfully happy. We tell that story on the beginner's course just to illustrate how, in a sense, we're like the king. Because we can hear that story and think, oh yeah, the king's a bit of an idiot, there's no reason now to be happy. But actually, the way we live is very, very similar to the king. We kind of, our lives are propped up by lots of things that we think we need to make us happy. And one of the things that really illustrated this to me was going on pilgrimage, and just having all of my usual comforts taken away from me, and just realising how quickly my mental states unravelled. And I struggled some days quite a lot, and just watching people around me, and we kind of feel like, well, we're quite happy, we're quite content. But if you're in a situation when the things are taken away from you that you rely on and depend upon, it's a really good experiment to see, well, actually, how happy are you? How content are you? So.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a couple of examples examples of my own experience around craving. One is a negative one, and the other is a positive one, and I mustn't forget to do the positive one. So I came in earlier to meet up with Bodhi Naga, and we were just sitting in the green room talking about what we were going to say. And I had an example ready, okay, an example from the past. It's still a bit embarrassing, but I feel like I've got over it. But I said to Bodhi Naga, I've just had this terrible day. I don't get much time off actually, but I've had a whole day off. And what have I done with the day? Well, I've just been on the internet. I've been procrastinating, okay? So I've been doing my cycle of, I look at Facebook, then I look at the news, then I look at my email, and then I find something else to look at. And then I go back and look at Facebook, and then I look at it, and it just goes round and round and round. And hours can go by doing this. And it kind of feels really embarrassing to admit it, actually. But basically that's what I said to him. I said, I haven't written my talk, I haven't been outside and enjoyed the beautiful weather, I haven't cleaned my house, which I'd quite like to have done because it's disgusting. What I've done as well, I know what a lot of you have been doing today, actually. Because I've seen you on Facebook as well. I'll tell you a really embarrassing thing I do, which is sometimes I go on Facebook and I see something I quite like, but don't press like because I think they'll know. What else have I done? I've looked up. So there's in India, there's this great shop called Fab India, and I'm going there in February, which is months away, isn't it? But today I thought, I better just have a look at their website and see what kind of shirts they've got. They're very nice, actually, but... So I do feel just like that keen, actually. It's a bit like, it is actually going on the internet, me and my little tablet, my iPad, I am like a king. I could buy anything in the world I want if I've got the money for it. I can look up anything. It is amazing what I can do. But the trouble is, when I'm doing it, I'm just in this terrible cycle. And the cycle is that of the craving and dukkha. And actually, where is it? Okay.
Well, there's two actually.
There's two. So basically you'll remember, hopefully, this wonderful, this not so wonderful actually, real life. And basically, what's happening? So I have an uncomfortable feeling, and my uncomfortable feeling I think is something like, I've got so many things I could do. Actually, that's a very kind of Western thing, isn't it? The choice I've got. I've got this tremendous choice with my day. I've got some free time. Could go for a walk, could clean my house, all these things I don't want to do as well, all the phone calls I don't want to make. And I feel uncomfortable. So what do? I just go, just check Facebook, won't take me very long. So I've had a feeling, and then it's a feeling, basically, I don't like that feeling of anxiety. And also I might have to do something a bit unpleasant, like for a few minutes, do a bit of hoovering or something. So my usual response is, get on the internet. And then, of course, I don't know what it is. People here will know better than I do, but there's some amazing thing it must do with brain chemicals, because somehow it's very addictive, isn't it? It just gets to a particular, you get a response occasionally. I think that's what works. You get an occasional response, and it's enough to make you keep coming back for more.
I was talking about the little red button on Facebook where there's a notification, somebody's liked something you said, or somebody's commented on something you said, and it's like a real...
You have to keep going back just to make sure you've got some of those red things. Anyway, so you get the kind of pictures, and that's just for me is one that's very live for me a lot of the time actually, and I'm kind of embarrassed about because I just think, well, I should know better, And also because it's stopping me from enjoying a lot of things in life, it's stopping me from enjoying my time off actually, which is precious to me, and anyway. So the good one is actually from a long time ago as well, but it's something that's very significant to me because it really proved to me something about meditation and being on retreat. So probably about 12 years ago, I went for a week's meditation retreat at Taraloka, which is a women's retreat centre in Shropshire, and we did a lot of meditation. For me, it was really like a lot of meditation. And I didn't really think it was having much effect on me because I was just feeling a lot of distraction, of sleepiness, and it was difficult. And anyway, I drove there, I drove back. So on the way back, I was just driving through, I don't know where it was, anyway. And I suddenly thought, wow, the people in Shropshire are such good drivers. They're so kind. Look how, they're all being really kind to me. I was just looking at them and I thought, And the people of Shropshire are so good looking. Beautiful women, handsome men, what a place. And I thought, hang on, it wasn't like this when I drove here a week ago. People looked fairly ugly and they were bad drivers, I thought, actually, what's changed is my mind. And that was a really important moment for me, because it just showed that all this stuff I'd heard at talks like this actually really worked for me. So I think what had happened is I'd had a week of meditating, which allowed me to just, my mind to calm down, to get out of the cycle of craving and aversion. And then appreciation could arise. It could just naturally arise once I was out of that cycle. So I enjoyed the pleasure of enjoying and appreciating what was around me. So I'm now going to talk a little bit, as advertised by the advertising man, about how we can develop pleasure in our lives in a healthy way. And I'm just going to start with a quote from this really good book, which I will advertise as well, actually, which is it's called Living with Awareness, and it's written by Sangha Night. It's about a very ancient and famous sutta, the Satipatthana Sutta, which is about developing awareness and mindfulness. And I love this book, and I could have read loads of quotes from it. So if you're looking for a good book to take on your holidays, take this one. Anyway, okay, so he says, if spiritual practice is to transform your life, you need to think of it as something you can enjoy, not just a hard grind. And this means making sure that there's not too much of a contradiction between spiritual activities and the activities of daily life, and looking for enjoyment in both. If there's at least an element of enjoyment in our daily lives, we'll be able to bring that positive attitude to puja, our study of the Dharma, and our meditation. The alternative, a dreary day followed by a meditation that is nothing short of a struggle, is hardly an inspiring prospect. So we need pleasure. We are human beings who need pleasure. And if the kind of approach that Bodhinaga's been talking about to pleasure gives us such suffering, but we need pleasure in our life, well then how do we develop that pleasure? That's what I'm going to look at. And what I'm looking at is basically, it's the move from what's called Kama Chandra, which is pleasure in sensual experiences, towards Dharma Chandra. So that's pleasure in the Dharma. And you can see it as being perhaps a move from a consumer mentality, as Bodhinaga described, to an aesthetic mentality. So it's moving from what can I get out of this to one of just appreciating. Okay? So we can gradually train ourselves to find, and we can also, as well as doing that, we can also gradually train ourselves to find more refined ways of pleasure in our lives. So firstly, just to look a little bit at the idea of moving from this utilitarian way of seeing the world to the aesthetic. So it's about valuing things, people, experiences for themselves. Not what we can get out of them, but what we can appreciate without being self-referential. So we can just enjoy the universe, we can just appreciate it. And Sangha actually gives an example when he was in Nepal, and he saw a very beautiful, huge tree. And I don't know if anyway, a Nepalese person came along, and Sangha actually said, look at the beautiful tree. And the Nepalese person said, yes, it'd make loads of firewood, wouldn't it? It would just keep us going for ages. And that's the utilitarian, it would give us loads of firewood. Now I do have a bit of sympathy for the Nepalese person, because presumably he needed that firewood to kind of keep him warm in the winter. But that is the attitude that we can often have, is what can it give us? What can that person give us? What can that thing give us? Rather than just an appreciation of it for its own sake. And Sangha has also got a wonderful idea, which I found very challenging at first, which he calls the greater mandala of complete uselessness. Okay? So the idea of that is that we live in a mandala. That's everything around us in our lives, our work, our family, how we spend our time. And what we're trying to do with our spiritual practice is kind of make that more beautiful as we can. But for many of us, and I've really experienced that recently, we get so caught up in those day-to-day utilitarian things. How am I going to earn enough money? Am I doing all my jobs? Have I insured the car? Have I paid my mortgage? All that kind of stuff. Have I done the work? Have I done my to-do list? It goes on and on. We get so caught up in that utilitarian way of living that we don't have an aesthetic pleasure of what's going on. In fact, what we lose is that element of play. We're no longer playing in our lives. And the greater mandala of uselessness is basically kind of going, just stop being useful. You don't have to be useful. It's fine. You know, we're here. We're just human beings. There's been an awful lot of evolution that got us to the place where we are. We have this wonderful aesthetic sense. We can just sit and enjoy the world. Now, as part of that, we might want to do some stuff, but we do it because we want to do it, not because we're kind of driven by that sense of I have to be useful. So I found the whole idea really lovely. And the idea, I think, is that you have this great mandala of play, of aesthetic appreciation, of being completely useless. And part of it in there, you know, you will be doing the things you need to do in life, but you're doing them because you want to do them, not because you're driven to do them. So, yes, I think if you live in that sense of appreciation, you will live in joy and delight. You will enjoy a lot of pleasure, actually. And I think I certainly have I've been realising recently, a very strong, underneath me, a sort of very Protestant, Puritan kind of ethic that I shouldn't enjoy life. That if I do start to enjoy it, somehow I shouldn't, because that's a bad thing to do. And I think Vidania talks about when he spent a lot of time in Mexico and Spain, which are actually Catholic countries, and people there have they enjoy life a lot more. Whereas I've definitely got all that conditioning about I shouldn't enjoy life, I shouldn't have pleasure. And I'm just trying to kind of blow that apart a bit, because why not? What's the point, you know, of living if you don't enjoy yourself, really? So, how might we have a healthy way of developing pleasure? So I've got 6 kind of things. So it's a bit like, you know, when you go on Facebook and there are those things you can go and look at, which are 6 ways to lead a healthy, pleasurable life. So the first is, what she does is just press that button. So go to that page, and the first one is nature. So enjoying nature is a fantastic way, actually, to really have an aesthetic experience where we're not trying to own it. Unless, of course, we're trying to take photographs in a particular way. I mean, that can be a trouble, kind of. Sometimes I feel I have to put my camera down because I'm trying to own this beautiful thing rather than just enjoying it. But, you know, if you can be at a sunset, if you can be by the sea, the ocean, if you can be up at Lockabrook looking down at that beautiful view without trying to own it, you just have a real sense of aesthetic enjoyment of pleasure. And it's not one that it's not utilitarian at all, it's just pleasure. So I think that's a really helpful way that we can develop pleasure. The second one is the arts, and particularly music, poetry, good novel, films, visual arts. We can again enjoy those without having this sense of wanting to own them. We just enjoy them because they're beautiful. And they also actually will help us to become, I suppose, our pleasures to become more refined as well. I think a third one is meaningful work. So if we're doing something that we think is really important, that inspires us, through that we can often get a really wonderful sense of pleasure, actually, which I think is also an aesthetic one as well. It's not a utilitarian one. It's one where we can feel like we've contributed something. And then friendship. I think friendship can be a real way of seeing us moving away from utilitarianism, which is, I'd like that person to be my friend because I'm really lonely, or I'd like that person to be my friend because they're really cool, and if I hang out with them, other people think I'm cool. Or I'd like that person to be my friend because, I don't know, they take me, whatever, dancing or something. It's a bit like, actually, we can actually just enjoy people as they are through friendship. The fifth one is meditation. So sometimes meditation can be difficult, but often meditation can actually be really enjoyable as well. And it's really important that we are doing what we can to have enjoyable meditations. Someone the other day said to me something about they felt a bit kind of guilty, or that they weren't actually meditating right because they were just sitting and having pleasure. And I just think, well, if you're doing that, just enjoy it, you know. It's actually it's positive for your mind to be in dhyana. It's good for you. It's not a bad thing to be doing at all. And the last one, which I think is really powerful when I can do it, is sympathetic joy. So this is joy at other people's happiness. And just think, you know, if only I could be happy when someone else is happy, I'd just be happy all the time. It'd be fantastic. Because I know a lot of people, and a lot of them are happy a lot of the time. So if somebody else had a really nice house and a really good job and whatever else it was, I could just enjoy their pleasure and I would be happy as well. So, and I just want to finish off my little bit here with just talking about how we can actually do things with other people in the Sangha that we enjoy. And it's a way, I suppose, to just have more pleasure. And some of them already happen in the Sangha, which is great. So there are people who sing together in the choir. I think some people are going to go climbing together. I see on Facebook, actually. There used to be a wonderful group where people did knitting together, which has stopped. Looking at Sean. It's okay. People with children get together on a Friday afternoon and enjoy being with their children and have pujas and stuff once a month. Some people went swimming together, the retreat this weekend. We went on retreat together actually and had just great pleasure in each other's company. So those are ways that we can have a lot of pleasure where we're actually moving away from being a consumer towards a much more aesthetic appreciation. And now I'm going to have an example.
I wanted to I'll talk about a specific example in a way which illustrates how we go about refining our pleasures in a way, because there's this process where we might read, we hear all these examples. I came along to the Buddhist Centre that will engage with the arts and poetry and all these things, and things I've never done before, and and there's all these things that I did enjoy doing at the time, and one of those was football, and I thought, well, that's not spiritual, I should stop doing that. So that was the kind of rational response I thought, and I came across this idea, okay, well, we've got to refine our pleasures, have more spiritual pleasures, and I thought, okay, well, what's the point of football? There's nothing spiritual about it. So I just took this rational decision, okay, well, I'm just going to stop watching football, stop playing football, just kind of have nothing to do with it really, because it's a bit of a waste of time, isn't it? Kind of these 22 guys kicking this bit of leather around, what's the kind of spiritual value of that? So basically that's what I did, and for maybe 6 or 7 years, I just didn't have much to do with football. Well, I had a bit to do with it, but not as much as I used to have to do with it. Like, football was a massive part of my life. I played twice a week and trained twice a week when I was in my early 20s, and it was just a really big part of my life. And it was also the main way I connected with my father as well, because my dad is a big football fan. So the main way we can kind of communicate and spend time together is by watching football. And so I did that, and then about a year ago, 18 months ago, Moga Banksa said to me, why don't you take your dad to a football match as a bit of a kind of a treat, to have some pleasure, because you've been working quite hard, why don't you have some pleasure and do that? So last season I took a kind of a rational decision again to revisit football, just to kind of re-engage with football, and I started to play once a week, and I took my dad to a few matches last year, and I've been watching the matches and just become really kind of engrossed again in the whole world of football. And just had loads and loads of fun with it, actually, just loads and loads of pleasure from it. And what I realised I'd done is kind of almost like trying to... It's got this idea of renunciation in the spiritual life, that with these pleasures, and like Satyajyotis talked right at the start, this kind of myth that you need to abandon things that you enjoy because they're not spiritual. And I realised that I'd done that, and what I'd done is just left loads of energy out of my life and loads of pleasure out of my life. And a year later, having re-engaged with this kind of big part of my life, which is very pleasurable, I had loads of fun. And people have commented that I seem to be quite different to how I was a year ago, kind of much more relaxed, much more easier to be around, kind of just more playful and light than I was a year ago. So it seems to have done me quite a lot of good, actually. So what I want to talk about is just a danger of this process of thinking we need to refine our pleasures, is to kind of let that happen gradually and naturally, and don't kind of force it, don't kind of force the things in a way. There's a sense in which gradually we're going to be moving to pleasures which are more and more refined, and in a way have a real benefit to our consciousness. Ultimately, what we're looking to do is to try to transform our consciousness, as Satyajyoti's example really brought out. As we transform our state of mind and become happier, more content, more expansive, well then, we'll take pleasure in much more refined things, actually, because I'm trying to force myself to enjoy poetry. I'm just not really interested, to be honest. I bought loads and loads of poetry books and loads of classic literature novels, and they're just all piled up on my shelf. I've never really opened any of them. And actually, until recently, when I'm on retreat, I write poetry. I enjoy reading poetry, but when I'm not, my consciousness is just very different. So when I'm in very good conditions and I'm doing lots of meditation, I get a taste of my consciousness as it will be in the future. That's what seems to happen. And my consciousness in the future seems to enjoy poetry and writing poetry. But my consciousness in these conditions around Sheffield likes football and Facebook, and all the things that everybody else likes. But there's a sense in which actually things just do drop away naturally. That's something I've experienced, and I do get I get a lot of pleasure in the spiritual life from the things that Sacerdotes talked about, from friendships, especially friendships, just the pleasure of being with people that I love and love me and that I feel really comfortable with. A lot of pleasure from that intimacy and openness. Just seeing people's sympathetic joy, seeing people grow and develop. I see so many people who come to the Buddhist Centre and they change and they grow and they become inspired and their lives change, and that's a huge pleasure. That's just one of the great pleasures that you can have in life, is just seeing other people change and grow. So basically it is working. My consciousness is gradually becoming refined at a gradual pace, but I suppose the message I wanted to get across is just to not to kind of force it, and to in a way, as Sacerdotes talked about, find the things that you do enjoy and do them with other people, kind of bring them into your spiritual life rather than abandoning them or kind of cutting them off. So if you enjoy climbing, climb with other people, and don't kind of stop climbing, just climb with other people. If you enjoy singing, sing with other people. Make it part of your spiritual practice. And don't you don't have to kind of be miserable in a way. That's the title of the talk. It's not about being miserable. You don't have to give up what you love. You have to give up being miserable, and then you eventually your pleasures will change and your activities will change over time. So just to kind of round up and conclude what we've been talking about. There are certainly ways in our society where we chase pleasures in a way that causes us suffering, and rather than kind of alleviating the suffering, it makes it worse. It makes the situation worse. And advertising and society fuels that. In a way, our economy is fueled by that. This sense of craving and getting more and more pleasures, more and more owning more and more stuff. That, in a way, that's a very destructive way of associating with pleasure. But over time we can move away from that gradually, and especially in good conditions we can move away from that. We can find ways of appreciating people, appreciating things. So when pleasures come, when we get a chocolate brownie, rather than obsessing about which dessert we should have had, we can just taste the chocolate brownie, we can enjoy it, appreciate it, and when it's finished, that's fine, it's gone, we'll have another one another time. But it's just this, we can not say we can't enjoy pleasures, but it's this appreciation of life, appreciation of other people, appreciation of beauty. That's we're trying to move more and more into that mode, rather than what can I get from things and what do I need to do. We've given you a few examples that you can think about of ways of having healthy pleasure and kind of spiritual pleasure. And maybe just to end by saying it's not about being miserable. So as Buddhists, what we're trying to give up is being miserable.